Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to Freight in the City's first webinar on driving innovation in urban freight. As I say, it's the first one we've done, so I hope it goes okay. We've got three fantastic speakers lined up for you today from Transport for London, Renault Trucks and Carlsberg. I'd like to start by thanking Renault Trucks for sponsoring this event. Without them, we couldn't do this sort of thing, so thank you very much indeed to Carlos and Renault. Obviously, urban freight, my word, it's been a big shake-up in the past 12 months with the pandemic. We've seen London deserted as people left their offices and started working from home, often in the suburbs, not in the city centre. It's led to enormous shifts in freight traffic. But I was talking to a courier company, the MD of a courier company yesterday, and he was saying that, you know, slowly, city centre urban freight is starting to recover. So as we go forward, even though the pandemic might lead to some long-term changes in terms of more home working and less commuting, I think we will start seeing things pick up and go back to something like normal, certainly later this year and early next year. So the problems that we have with urban freight, with air pollution, carbon emissions, congestion, noise, they're not going to go away. So I think in a way the pandemic perhaps gives us, it's a often used phrase, the chance to build back better. And I think that's something that, you know, hopefully will happen. And electromobility is going to play a huge, huge role in that building back better. So that's enough from me. We're going to kick off with Rikesh Shah. As I say, he's from TfL, Head of Commercial Innovation at TfL. He's responsible for creating TfL's Innovation Hub. And also he's going to be talking today about Freight Lab, which is helping drive some of these innovations that we will need as we get back to busier London streets. So over to you, Rikesh. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Steve, and good morning to everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite, Steve, and it's great to join Carlos and Thomas on the panel. So as Steve says, I'm Rikesh Shah. I'm the Head of Commercial Innovation at Transport for London. I also sit on the Mayor of London's Smart London board. And what I will do today is give you some context around Transport for London and some of the strategic goals that we're focusing on, but also primarily focus on, you know, our sort of approach to innovation, and then give you a case study on the Freight Lab project that Steve mentioned. Next slide, please. Yep. So just to give you an overview of Transport for London, pre-COVID, we were responsible for 31 million daily trips in the City of London. So that's in central London and the suburban areas. And our asset base is highlighted on the screen. We have about 9,500 buses. So pre-COVID, we were responsible for about 7 million trips on the bus network across London. Generally, most people are within 400 meters of a bus stop in the city. We're also responsible for every single traffic light in London. We're also responsible for operating the tube service, which carried around 5 million people pre-COVID. And we're also responsible for other rail services such as the Docklands Light Railway, the London Overground service, as well as the tram service, which operates in southwest London. We're also responsible for the strategic roads in London. That's called the Transport for London Road Network, or some people know it as the Red Routes. And that's, I suspect, a part of the network that the freight industry uses regularly. So that could be the A roads, such as the A406, the A1, A2 within the M25. And we're also responsible for tunnels and a series of other assets on our street side. But essentially, we could be an operator, we could be a large franchisee, or we could be a policymaker or a regulator in the case of taxi and private hire. So generally, with most things moving around the city, Transport for London has some sort of involvement. Next slide, please. And we have a strategic goal, and that number is really important to us. So the Mayor has set out a target that by 2041, 80% of trips in London will be made by walking, cycling, or public transit. And the Mayor's transport strategy sets out three key pillars. The first pillar is around a healthier London. So we want to make sure that we've got good quality of air. We tackle Vision Zero, which is zero deaths on London's road network. We also focus on people being more active. And in London and the UK generally, there is an issue of more people having type 2 diabetes and obesity. So we do want Londoners to walk and cycle more. The second pillar within the Mayor's transport strategy focuses on a good public transport experience. Once we come out of COVID, we want to make sure it's not a car-based recovery. We want to ensure that we use the opportunity we have with cycling, walking, and public transport. So that we need to provide that good alternative. And when Crossrail comes into London, connecting West and East London, or whether it's the extension of the Bakerloo line, it's something that we continuously need to invest in. And the third area is creating more jobs and supporting the economic growth of our city. And transport plays a fundamental part with any city's growth agenda. Next slide, please. So just touching on innovation. So Transport for London, our predecessor organisations, have an element of DNA within the organisations. And here are a couple of examples. The one on the left is when Charles Pearson in the 1850s and the 1860s developed the first metro service in the world. And this is because there was high levels of congestion, mainly horse and cart, during that era. And a new innovative mode of transport was developed. And as you know now, metro services are common across most urban cities across the world, or urban environments across the world. So on the right-hand side, you see an example of the first traffic light outside of the Houses of Parliament. And that was to deal with the traffic flow in that area. And in those days, clearly, the signalling wasn't as mature as it is now. But it worked. They used semaphores and various other things to ensure people can move around safely. And bringing it to the modern day, the examples such as smart ticketing, and the Oyster card are now contactless. We're one of the largest merchants of contactless in Europe. And the other area you may have heard about is open data. TfL decided to release lots of its open data. And as a result, 42% of Londoners use an app powered by TfL data. And there are about 17,000 developers out there who are creating over 700 apps. And then on the engineering side, we've got examples such as the Victoria Line signalling upgrade, where during the peak now you have 36 trains going each way on Victoria Line during the peak hours. And that genuinely is world class compared to any other metro system. So innovation is something that we think about regularly, and ultimately it's around how do we ensure we provide better value for our citizens and Londoners to make their lives better. Next slide, please. So our philosophy to any form of innovation or new things is threefold. Firstly, we get approached with innovative ideas all the time. And we want to make sure we don't say immediately yes to everything, nor do we say no to everything. It's about having that engagement. And when we have that engagement, we talk about the Mayor's transport strategy. If something new comes in, if it's not good for the air, or it doesn't support the equity agenda, it's probably something that we won't be supportive of. However, if it supports the safety agenda, it supports the accessibility goals that we have, it focuses on using space efficiently, well, then we'll take that conversation further. And then we'll explore whether this type of innovation has been shaped in London before. And if it hasn't, we'll run some trials to build that evidence. And based on that evidence, we will then decide what our route to market is to deliver it, whether it's policy, whether it's procurement, or some other tools that we have. But I think what's really important is whether it's a new form of mobility, whether it's e-scooters, which we're currently working on a procurement for an e-scooter trial in London, or whether it's demand responsive buses, or whether it's drones, or whether it's a component that goes into existing hardware that we have on our network. We apply the same philosophy. Next slide, please. And the next slide again, please. Thank you. So what we've recognized in the last few years is the ecosystem of innovators has changed significantly, and the way cities should be working with the wider ecosystem has also changed. So I've been at Transport for London 20 years. When I first started in the organisation, generally our relationship with the external world was through quite traditional. It was us setting out a RFP, and then as part of that RFP, people would respond, and we would go, and procure. But I think what we're finding now is the barriers to entry have lowered. So you could be a startup, you could be a scale up, you could be a large corporate. They've all got different ideas that are innovative. And what we should be doing is engaging with that ecosystem to use all these different powerful brains from across the world and see how they can solve some of our city's problems around any agenda item, including freight, which I talk about Freight Lab in a second. But one important principle is there. We're still responsible for taxpayers' money. So any process where it involves transactions will still be open and transparent in any procurement. Next slide, please. So what we've started to do more and more now is we've got a shop window in essence, which is we are sharing our problem statements with the market. And we're saying we want to hear about prospective ideas that you might have. So we put that on at tfl.gov.uk/innovation, where innovators are asked to come up with suggest innovative solutions that perhaps we've not tried before. We also have a database where people can register. So if we are putting out various calls, we can readily contact people from across the world. And in parallel, we're always horizon scanning. So all these conceptual things that I hear about, whether it's AR, VR, cloud, quantum computing, etc., what does it actually mean in the transport sector? And how do we apply it to solve problems and again, make life in London better for our citizens? Next slide, please. We also work with corporate partners, and whether they're a large manufacturer or whether they're a service provider to the end user, we try and engage as closely as possible. And we tried something innovative with Bosch over the last 2 years, and that was whereby we shared some of our problem statements, we provided some subject matter expertise, and we shared data. And we also gave them an opportunity to access our assets. And in return, Bosch and their engineers and their wider ecosystem came up with innovative solutions. And in return, what we came up with is a model of co-innovation. And the concept of co-innovation here is, to a degree, providing mutual value as part of that partnership. And can we develop innovative solutions that makes, again, life in London better and solving some of these key problems. And the reason why it's a different model is because when we're not talking at a transactional level, it's much more at a collaboration level. And the two areas that we focused on Bosch were the two key areas. One was around air quality modelling at a really hyper-local level. So we did this near Brixton High Street, where by holding traffic lights back slightly, we were assessing what impact it would have on a densely populated population outside of Brixton Station. And what we recognized is it had a significant value where exposure to bad air was reduced. And we also tried a computer vision AI technology at junctions near Brixton High Street. And that was to explore people's behavior as they're walking through the pedestrian crossing and seeing where the risk profiling is. So we can put some interventions in place to, again, reduce the chance of someone being involved in a collision. Next slide, please. We have a very large supply chain, so it's really important that we use that supply chain to innovate with. We work with suppliers within London, within the UK, but also internationally, some of which may be on this webinar. And what we want to do is, if you've got innovative ideas and we can explore that through an existing contract, we really want to hear about it, because again, problems come up, on a regular basis. So let's be agile and flexible as to how we solve them. Next slide, please. And then we also ran innovation challenges. So this particular challenge was, rather than a complicated RFP, it was, do you have an idea that can reduce the adverse impact of roadworks in the City of London? And we're inundated with responses. We had 100+ responses. And we did this in partnership with London Councils, which is another public body in London, but we also did it with the utilities companies. So again, another example of partnership working to solve challenges that each of the partners were facing in different ways. And we're very close to going further with the procurement with some of the innovators that came through this challenge. Next slide, please. And then as a result, we started to build more challenges. You know, we ran one around encouraging more walking in the city, improving bus safety and focusing on that. Freight Lab I'll come on to in a second, but we've also looking to do more things around encouraging more cycling, Vision Zero, and also supporting our drivers who clearly have had a really difficult time over the past 9 months. Next slide, please. So, what is London Freight Lab? Firstly, I'd like to say that we clearly recognise the role that freight plays in the City of London, and how the freight industry and the servicing industry continue to keep our world-class city working and businesses thriving. Of course, currently we're going through a pandemic. It's tough times, but we will recover. And as I set out earlier, focusing on the Mayor's transport strategy, our focus is we want a healthier London. So we need to make sure that whatever form of transport is moving around the city, it supports our strategic goals, particularly around sustainability. So what the Mayor's Civic Innovation Challenge did is it brought various partners together, rather than us individually coming up with our own solutions to innovate. And by bringing the partners together, we're able to agree on the right problem statements and jointly offer various elements to make this challenge a success. Next slide, please. So rather than prescribing solutions at the beginning, we started with that problem statement, which is really important. And by starting on the problem statement, we made sure that we had data behind the problem statement, and we made sure that each of the partners, which I'll come on to in a second, were happy with that problem statement. But to give some context, in London, 90% of freight is handled by road, and we do have a large river through the City of London. And then 39% there's been a 39% increase in kilometers traveled in the past 25 years, and the road space has pretty much been the same. So, we set out a strategic problem statement, and then on the next slide, we started to focus on some of the themes. So some of the themes or the outcomes that we wanted through this trial were around: can we reduce congestion? Can we reduce emissions? Can we improve road safety? Can we help reduce costs for the carriers and the freight industry? And also, can we improve end user experiences, particularly customers? So there were some of the goals that we're focusing on as part of the trial. Next slide, please. So what did we offer? The first thing was we targeted innovative ideas from across the world. And you could be anyone. You could be a startup, you could be an academic, you could be a corporate or someone else. We wanted to hear about an idea. All you needed was an idea that had been tested. So it's not just completely a conceptual diagram. It's something that's been tested in some shape or form. And in terms of our offering, as set out on the screen, we provided some seed funding. We provided some subject matter expertise, both from TfL and our partners. We also offered up some land so people can try their innovative ideas without any cost in terms of land. And land in London, as we know, can be expensive. And also we provided a series of PR and other marketing support for the partners. So that was the offering we provided. And it's a great way to test new ideas. And next slide, please. So these are the partners that we worked with. You can see some are landowners, some are carriers, and others. There's one innovation partner. And the idea was, we went out, we put a call out to the market, and to just go through the timelines. We launched this in 2019, in November 2019. We selected partners through an open process, and as you can see, we've got some of the largest carriers in London on the list. We then ran a commercial competition to bring in the innovators. We down selected in February 2020. We then announced the winners around the same sort of time. Sadly, the pandemic kicked in around March, which meant we had to reprioritize activity given the crisis across the world, but in particular, well, including London. And then we restarted activity in the autumn in 2020. And where we are now is we've just started some of the trials in London. In total, there'll be about 13 trials planned. Next slide, please. Yep, and on the right-hand side, we list some of the partners who are collaborating with ourselves and some of the carriers. Next slide, please. And then just to give you a quick overview of some of the ideas that have come through. So the winners are listed on the screen. So the first one, Enzo. So Enzo focuses on sustainable tires to reduce PM 2.5 and PM 10 pollution levels. And it's very relevant to the electric vehicle because electric vehicles are heavier, so that will have a greater impact on tires. So again, very innovative solution that we're currently testing. The one on the bottom left, Fernhay, it very much focuses on the last mile delivery, and they've got 2 or 3 products that they're testing, which we're hoping can reduce the level of kilometers traveled locally, where parking spaces and other things are searched for. Humanizing autonomy in the middle, that focuses very much on road safety. So the idea there is to have a camera within screens and working with drivers. How can we use machine learning to provide training courses for some of their partners and their drivers around road safety in London? And we'll just see if it's useful or not. Appiway. So Appiway is focusing on digitizing the curb. And what we want to explore at this stage at a conceptual level is what's the level of parking availability at certain locations in London to help us better understand, and this product will help us better understand that. MSOL on the top right focuses on, as vehicle technology is improving over the last few years, can we start measuring noise and air pollution at given locations, and is it the same as it was previously? So that will be an interesting set of findings. And finally, Ford Mobility, they've developed a software-based solution which focuses on bringing together van drivers and connecting them with couriers in the last mile. So again, an interesting area to explore. So you can see that we've got 6 very different ideas which we want to test, and we'll be running trials from 3 months to up to 12 months. And at the end of that, we'll explore which ones are scalable, which ones are working. We'll be sharing data with each other. And then hopefully that results in new solutions coming in that creates a sustainable difference in London. Thank you. And that's the final slide. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Rikesh. I should have said at the outset that if you want to ask questions, we're going to work to the very end, and I will be moderating the questions to the whole panel. If you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to put your questions, I will be using my skill and judgment to pick the best ones and put them to the panel. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, please, that'd be great. We're going to move swiftly on to Carlos Rodriguez, the MD of Renault Trucks. He's very passionate about e-mobility. It's a very big theme of his, and Renault is going to be moving very quickly with heavy electric trucks, not just vans. So I'm very interested to hear what he's got to say about the latest developments on e-mobility. Over to you, Carlos. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Steve. And I think it was quite an interesting insight from Rikesh on the freight in London. I think he actually gave a very good transition to my section, which is 90% of the freight in London is done by road. And actually that gives us the perspective that the big way to solve CO2 greenhouse gas emissions and having cleaner cities is to through this urban decarbonization. So if we move to the next slide, I think it's clear that next slide, please. Yes, it is clear that I think until recently, a year ago, there was still a bit of a debate around what's the best solution to decarbonize city. I think now it's fair to say that electromobility is recognized as a solution to decarbonize transport. I think we have passed that now, and I think it starts in the urban environment, and it starts now. And that's what I would like to articulate today. There is no need to wait more for a better technology. The technology available today is there, and what we provide for urban transport, I think, fits most of our customer needs. So next slide, please. But I think what we are doing first is that we are positioning ourselves as a provider of transport solutions, of course, with electromobility, with electric vehicles, but that's part of our more global strategy around our own sustainability journey. And we have made strong commitments, around 3 key pillars around climate, resources, and people. On the climate side, of course, the Volvo Group, which Renault Trucks is part of, has agreed to the Paris Climate Agreement and the net zero by 2050 based on science-based targets. We have made strong commitments in terms of the share of vehicles, electric vehicles, and as part of our sales. As you can see, 35% overall. And I think another big statement we have made now, and I'm so proud that my private investors in the UK now and our distribution network, which are medium to large size companies, we have together decided that by 2030, for what's really under our control in the UK and Ireland, we will try to achieve, and we have committed to this net zero by 2030 for the scope 1 and 2 of our emissions. And that's a big statement, and I think it's the start of the journey. Of course, we're working around all this circular economy and I think protecting resources, how we can remanufacture vehicles, and we have tests ongoing with some of our customers in Europe to remanufacture or refurbish trucks at a certain point and extend their life. That's another way to protect our planet and to decrease CO2. And the last one is about the people shift, the competence shift, on people. With electromobility, we have a huge task ahead of us to change not only the competence of our salespeople, but also our technicians. So it's a big thing coming. So if we move forward then, on the next slide, please. Yeah, seems it's a bit slow. Yes. So coming back to Rikesh's presentation, there is 2 ways to reduce CO2. There is what I think, touching on Rikesh's point, which is all the vehicle load, and it's how do we optimize transport? How do we improve the capacity? How do we work on the infrastructure? The other thing, and this is where we, Renault Trucks, as a manufacturer, we are really active, is on the, let's say, the vehicle power generation. How do we, by improving our technology, improving the efficiency of our vehicles, we can reduce our carbon footprint impact? And we have really 2 strong activities. One is really on the engine itself, or the power unit. So you have the diesel, of course, improvements, and we have this strong commitment by 2025 to reduce by 15% on the conventional engines the CO2 emissions. And we are also now starting the sale of these zero tailpipe emission vehicles, our full and comprehensive ZE range. On the other front, we have also the alternative of traditional diesel with biofuels, with HVO, with also CNG, which provides a better CO2 compared to diesel. But again, that will depend on the applications, but those are the different ways of improving the CO2 generation and the carbon footprint of our vehicles. But today, I think it's all about our ZE range and the electric vehicle. So if we move to the next slide, please. Just to give some context, and back to what I said at the start, I think now there is a consensus that electric vehicles are the solution for the urban environment. So if we first do a well-to-wheel CO2 emission, on a typical urban profile of 150 kilometers per day, and this data is based on the average electricity Europe mix, okay, which is not very far of what we are today in the UK with around the 50% carbon-free electricity. Well, that tells you that an electric vehicle, an ZE vehicle, would deliver on a typical journey 60% better from a CO2 emission compared to a conventional diesel vehicle. Of course, gas and CNG is better than diesel, and that's good. But clearly, for urban environments, the electric vehicle is the best solution available today. If we move to the next slide, I think it's another view of that, which is, let's look at the bigger scheme, which is what we would call cradle to grave. So from the production, so from the raw materials, when we extract all these materials, down to the recycling of the vehicle, that's over a 12-year, I think, period on that slide. What you can see is that here, on the again, the middle column is the is 50% on based on the average EU. Let's say electricity mix. But if you look at a country like France, which the electricity is much more decarbonized, then we have an 80% improvement. And that's, for me, is a strong message, because what we know is that there is a strong commitment as part of the Green Deal that the UK government came on with this huge investment into wind and solar. We know that in the coming years, the electricity in UK will become even more decarbonized. So that means that the decisions made today on electric vehicles will only improve in the coming years in terms of impact on CO2. If we move to the next slide, please. Yeah. Back to the initial point, which is electrification will come, and this shift will come segment by segment and market by market. And I think today, there's no point in saying that we can do electric vehicles for all applications. No. But what is clear is that what we have today will do the job for urban distribution and waste. Of course, we will be touching regional at a later stage when technology evolve on the construction side as well, because there is different demands on the vehicles. But clearly today, I think we could almost state that maybe I'm a bit ambitious, but electromobility, technically speaking, can become mainstream very quickly in the urban environment for heavy goods vehicles. If we move to the next slide, and I'll elaborate on that. So when we talk to customers today, and we have met a number of them, the first approach is to come to us using the same kind of traditional approach, which is, oh, give me the price of the vehicle. But that's a bit more complex than that. So we have simplified that as much as we could. But this then is about providing the right vehicle tailor-made to the customer, providing the right battery solution. And that's not only the battery in the truck, it's also what we bring around it with the charging infrastructure. And we have partnered with let's say leading partners in the charging environment, in the UK, to help make these diagnoses at customer sites and making sure that the vehicle will deliver. We have then looked at the repair and maintenance, and the first worry of our customers is the battery. Will the battery last? And I think here we have made a strong statement where we have a battery promise where we guarantee a end of life available power to our customers to remove that risk. So we take away that risk and that fear from the customers to move and to take that step. And of course, we are working with our internal captive funding, Chronotruck's financial services, which can help us to package all of that and then deliver to our customers what we would call an equipment as a service. And that's, I think, the next step, and that's the big move forward with electromobility and electric vehicles. Next slide, please. Just to give you an example of what we mean. So if you take just a second here, the x-axis at the bottom tells you how many kilometers per day a vehicle is doing on an application. On the y-axis, so what you see is the energy consumption in kilowatt hours per 100K. So if we take a city distribution vehicle, for instance, we know that a traditional dry box plus a tail lift truck, which is what you would see in most of London and cities around the UK, is going to draw on a standard application with a standard, let's say we're working 100 roughly kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is basically 1 kilowatt hour per kilometer. Well, what you see in gray is this, in light gray is the available power at end of life. So assuming this is a 7-year contract we would do with a customer, we would guarantee that at the end of these 7 years, with our start and drive contract, the vehicle will still do 200 kilometers per day in one charge. The very light gray gives you with half an hour quick charge an extended range, but just with one full charge, it would go up to 200 kilometers at 7 years. That's quite a statement. And I think that shows that on TT distribution, the current technology is there to deliver. The same on refuse and waste, as you could see, much more demanding vehicle, but the batteries, they also do less mileage on a daily basis, of course, based on the application. And I think here we are confident that the trucks do that, and we will see in a moment that this is not a dream, it's a reality, as we have a number of vehicles already running in Europe. If we move to the next slide, please. So this is the range. So today we have from 3.1 tons up to 26 tons. And I think back to the presentation from Rikesh, this is about delivering on the urban environments, a one-stop shop to customers, so they don't have to worry about, this is a mix of solutions. You might need a last mile delivery van to do a certain application as a customer, and you might need a bigger vehicle to do some other deliveries. Well, this is a one-stop shop, and we can adapt really to what the customer needs. If we move quickly, I will just take you through some of these vehicles very quickly. So the next slide, please. This is our light commercial vehicle, and we are now with this vehicle doing very well in terms of partnership with bodybuilders and with customers in what we would call platform cab, chassis cab, adaptations. We will see a picture later of cherry pickers for the cities. We have cage tippers as well, which go very well in electric, which for cities and boroughs and councils are absolutely the solution to quickly move into the electrified to move with electrification. Sorry. If we move to the next slide, then we have our more bigger vehicles, 16 tons. And I think we see that the batteries range from 200 to 400 kilowatts, and we can have a range at start of life here up to 400 kilometers a day, based on what I said just before, 1 kilometer, 1 kilowatt hour as a standard distribution application. And the wheelbases that you see here are standard, but we can work with customers on longer wheelbases if needed. And if we move to the next slide, we have the bigger version of it, which is the 26 ton today for bigger transport, for waste applications, for instance. And we have, again, same thing, 3.9 meters wheelbase, but available on demand. And we have our sales engineers in Warwick and in Lyon at our head office, and the factory in Blainville, there to adapt to the customer needs. And I think there is something more, because there is an element of the urban distribution which we are not addressing yet, but that is coming very soon in the UK, and you will hear more about that in the coming 2 weeks. And I think it's going to be another big statement of us in our commitment to decarbonize the urban transport. So if we move to the next slide, please. This is, again, it is coming slowly but steadily. You could see, back to my point, that on the logistics and the distribution sector, we have a number of customers around Europe who are already using our vehicles. But it's not only there. You see on the waste and environmental that, again, there a number of customers are already using our vehicles, but also starting slowly but steadily in construction and also on the rental sector. I have highlighted 2 customers, which are Suez and Warburton's. Well, these 2 customers are the first 2 customers experiencing in the coming weeks. We will deliver the first 2 vehicles to Warburton's, historic bakery of the UK. I mean, very well-known brand, and we are absolutely thrilled and honored that they have trusted Renault Trucks for their first 16-ton vehicle, which will be operating in London, and then Suez as well. Fantastic, and we are so proud that again that flagship company and brand has trusted Renault Trucks for the first waste vehicle, which will be operating in Bristol in an urban environment. And if we move to the next slide, here we have a variety of applications. As you can see, again, you can see at the bottom right corner the kind of type cherry picker. The just to stop on the Denner vehicle, that's a vehicle from Switzerland, where the roof of the body is with solar panels, and these solar panels are actually directly powering the fridge unit on top of the truck. And if we move to the next slide, I'd like to have now Thomas Stalder to join us. Thomas has kindly accepted to join us today. You can see he's in a snowy Switzerland, and Thomas is going to give us a bit of his view on the company Carlsberg electrification journey, because it started before quite a long time ago, and not with Renault Trucks. But I think that's not the point. The point is your journey, and I think it's quite an inspiring journey that you have taken, and you have taken an order of 20 of our units, one delivered already to you. So over to you, Thomas, if you want to give us a bit of your story.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. So hello, everybody. Maybe first to my position, I'm the VP Integrated Supply Chain for Feldschlossen Carlsberg, and I'm in the board of Feldschlossen since 20 years. In the year 2006, I said to my fleet manager, basically it would make sense to have e-trucks instead of diesel trucks. And then we were looking around the world if there are any possibilities. And we found our first e-trucks, you know where? In London. And then we ordered 5 trucks from Modec, and these trucks were small, 7.5 tons, but the effect on the customers and also internally was really good. So the whole environment, people saw us as very innovative. Unfortunately, the technology of Modec was not very good, and I guess in 2011 the company bankrupt. In parallel, we were looking for 18-ton trucks, and together with a Swiss company, we made a pilot, and we introduced the first 18-ton e-truck in Switzerland in September 2013. And based on the experience we had, mainly with the drivers, when I was talking to and this truck was going around in Switzerland, and every driver was really positive, extremely positive to the e-trucks. And the guys told me, why don't we have e-trucks all over? And we were really then looking, having discussions with other big companies. And finally, we are now in a situation that we could order 20 e-trucks from Renault. Maybe to make, we have seen a lot of numbers, of pictures. Maybe you should know 2 numbers for our Swiss business. We have in the high season around about 10,000 deliveries per week. So we are delivering 10,000 restaurants, pubs all over Switzerland and stores per week. And we are in the fast mover consumer goods. So branding is important, and our brand is Feldschlossen. And the Feldschlossen beer as a brand has a market share in Switzerland of 23%, so quite high. So we are the number 1 in the beer business, in the beverage business, but also when it comes to the market share. And in this time, sustainability is becoming more important, of course, and the connection between sustainability and connecting with the brand is also a huge benefit for the whole company. And this, I would say, this idea to have CO2 neutral logistics in Switzerland, based also on e-trucks, is heavily supported also by the commercials. It's not only a logistics point. So at the moment, we have 2 e-trucks from Carlos running so far. The third is delivered this week. And the guys, the feedback I called with the drivers, they are really very positive and happy and looking forward for the next ones. So this was in very short our journey of having e-trucks. We started in 2006 thinking about that. We had a lot of discussions. We had the first 5 MODEC in 2008. And we have experience with e-trucks since 2013 with big ones. And personally, I'm a big fan of e-trucks. Okay, so that's my input. Maybe the last thing, 10,000 deliveries per week, 23% market share. And if you make the connection between the brand, public relations, and also the people internally, then e-truck is really connecting everything together and bringing the company forward. Okay, yep. So that was my PowerPoint presentation. I was the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
No, that's much better actually. Thank you, Thomas. Okay. And I think it was very inspiring for a lot of us. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlos, and thank you, Thomas, for taking the time to be with us. I've got a lot of good questions coming in, and I can answer one of them straight away. People are asking if the slides will be available after the presentations, and the answer is yes. This session is going to be recorded, and from tomorrow it will be available on freightinthecity.com for around about 30 days. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind just turning your camera and your microphone back on. Before I go to the questions, I've got a very quick question for you, really. What corporately for Carlsberg, what was the driver to adopt these, still very expensive e-trucks? Is it a corporate social responsibility thing for the brewery, or is there a business case? Are you going to save money from running these vehicles?
At the end of the day, it was both. So first, we in Carlsberg, we have a campaign towards zero. So 0 accidents, 0 emission, and so on. And when maybe Switzerland has a specialty, you don't have to pay road tax if your truck is an e-truck. And based on this, not paying the taxes, so by making the calculation, we saw that the e-truck is at least as efficient as a normal diesel truck.
Right.
So that's and on top you have the benefit of having a good public relation for your company and also the brand.
Yes.
And the positive effect on your employees.
Great, thank you. Again, Carlos and Rikesh, if you could turn your microphones back on. I've got some very good questions coming in. I hope you're going to be ready for these. Some quite tough ones. I'd like to ask Rikesh and then Carlos, if that's okay, just about the philosophy of using electric vehicles in urban environments. I mean, for the last few years, ever since Euro 6 emerged, we were told that in terms of particulates and nitrous oxides, which are the really dangerous emissions as far as health and air quality are concerned, Euro 6 diesel was doing a pretty good job. Obviously, battery electric are 0 carbon tailpipe emissions, as well as 0 particulates and 0 NOx. So obviously, we just heard that tyres on electric vehicles will still cause particulate emissions. But I'm just wondering what the overall philosophy about encouraging electric vehicles in cities is for. Are you saying that Euro 6 is no longer fit for purpose, or is this battery electric a step on from Euro 6? What's the role going to be of both technologies? Rikesh, for you first, if you wouldn't mind, and then I'll ask the same question to Carlos.
Yep, thanks, Steve. So I think, there's a strategic goal here around zero carbon, and that's where we want London to be. And it's not something you can do overnight. And also, there's lots of legacy, trucks, systems that need to, carry on, and perhaps in some cases be retrofitted. So I think you can't jump from A to C directly. So I think it's the direction of travel. Ultimately, we want to be Vision Zero, but in the meantime, what can we do with existing systems that we have to minimize the level of pollution from vehicles?
Right. For Carlos, what's Renault's philosophy? As I say, what's the role of battery electric for you personally?
I think we should position that from, are the Euro 6 vehicles cleaner vehicles than Euro 0? Yeah, from a cleaner perspective, absolutely. I think we have achieved 98 or 97%. So from a cleaner perspective, Euro 6 vehicles are doing a fantastic job. I think that's not the point. The point is, back to Rikesh, the point is we have a bigger topic, which is climate change. For the urban environment, you can't go below 0, So as an electric vehicle delivers 0 tailpipe emissions. There is no best solution to that. I think that the point, and why I think it's important to link that to the electric mix of the country, is that in UK there is clear commitments and drive for a renewable, a decarbonized electricity, and it's not in 20 or 30 years from now. It's coming in the coming years. This year, 50% of the electricity in the UK last year and this year will be decarbonized. So I think for me, it's not that the current trucks are not good from an air quality perspective. It's that they are not the right ones for the climate change solution, and that's our commitment as a brand and as a group to decarbonize the transport.
Yes. Rikesh, quick question for you. The London Lorry Control Scheme, it was designed many years ago when trucks were quite noisy, quite polluting. With electric vehicles coming, is it time to review the London Lorry Control Scheme and let these quieter, cleaner vehicles run at evenings and weekends on these restricted routes?
Yeah, of course, we have to engage with London councils and the local boroughs on this too. But I'd like to think that by us running trials like Freight Lab, and in particular the MSOL solution, we are creating new evidence that's not been there before. So if we're measuring noise pollution, we're measuring air quality levels. If things have changed from what they were in the past when that policy was brought in, well, then I think that should be part of the evidence to inform future policy.
Yes. A quick question for Thomas. We've had one question come in. You've got a nice snowy background there, Thomas, so I guess it's even colder with you than it is here. One operator who's got some experience with battery electric vehicles is saying that the range significantly reduces in the cold weather. Have you been finding that, and is that an operational issue for you?
So the experience was within 6 years. So you have to know we have direct store distribution, and the range per round trip per day is between 40 and 100 kilometers and not more. So we are not driving 200 or 300 kilometers, and we never had an issue with the range.
Okay.
So that was not a problem.
Does the range go down a lot when you're operating in -20? Do the batteries not perform as well?
Also, fortunately, we didn't have a lot of these situations. So -10 or -8 was maybe the peaks, or -12, and there's an impact, but it's less than 5-10%.
Yes, 5-10%. Great, thank you very much. There's one here for you, Carlos. Quite a few questions, all relating to the cost of going electric compared with conventional internal combustion engines, and how, in particular, smaller operators are going to be able to fund this transition. What help can you give to people? We've seen quite a few of the big fleets, the UPSs, DHLs of this world. They've got the resources. What can you as a manufacturer do to help some of the smaller companies make this transition?
No, I think I think, as I said, first, there is consensus now that electromobility in cities is the solution. Second, we are as any new product, we are in a product development curve, meaning that we are at the early adopter stage at the moment. Like anything, we scale and technology evolving. I mean, the competitiveness of these vehicles will increase, but I think it's not really the point is back to TCO, the total cost of ownership, and I think people should not be scared by when we talk about the prices around the upfront price of a truck. You have to look at the overall equation. And if we look at waste, for instance, when some vehicles do 2 to 3 miles per gallon, or 70 to 70 liters, or even 80 liters per 100K, when you put all together the numbers, you very quickly realize that, you know what, you're not that far from being very close. On the distribution side, and I think I'd like to, one point that Thomas highlighted, I think being at the early adopter stage, cities around the UK and London, we need to encourage people, okay, who are on companies, small operators who are willing to take that, to be on a proactive stance. And we see that we have we have that coming in the UK, but we have seen some really ambitious schemes in other parts of the Europe. We have some cities in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, for instance, being very aggressive in terms of support recently. We have in France, the government has said recently that they have two things around 50,000 euro by truck, plus an accelerated scheme from a tax perspective. Will that last forever? I don't know. But they are there now to, let's say, support those early adopters, those companies who have understood today, this is the trajectory, this is the direction. I think between us, the authorities, we should work together to encourage these companies to do that.
Yes, that sort of follows on, Rikesh, for a question for you. I mean, we've seen the low emission zone, we've now seen the ultra low emission zone, and one or two boroughs have got zero emission zones. What is the best mechanism to encourage operators to take up electric vehicles? Is it going to be a stick in the form of chargeable zones if you don't have battery electric, or will there be carrots, some sort of incentive to encourage the take up rather than punishing those who can't do it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points there. I think the first one is it's not just about you converting to electric vehicles. You know, some of the examples that I set out through Freight Lab wasn't about converting vehicles. There are other sort of innovative ideas that we could potentially use to reduce the overall emissions in London. But we have introduced things such as scrappage schemes. You know, for some of the, I think 4,500 have applied in that program. So there is a carrot element, and I think a lot of it is around engaging with the different stakeholders. So in London, when we produced the Freight and Servicing Action Plan, that was produced with input from a wide range of stakeholders, including businesses and retailers, including the freight industry, and many others. So I think it's a combination of a wide range of policy leaders.
Right, thank you. There's a very good question coming here from one of the participants about street space. And he says, you know, the street space scheme is having the reverse effect on freight, putting vehicles at the curbside for longer and increasing the distance operators have to travel. He's asking, will street space continue after the pandemic, or will it be rescinded?
Yeah, so I think we've converted 90 kilometers of street space in response to the pandemic, and clearly it's there for very good reasons. We want Londoners to be safe during the crisis. And what we have done is we've worked with local businesses and the freight industry to set up different delivery zones in support of the streetscape scheme. So I think a lot of the answers are local. Will it continue in the long run? I honestly don't know.
Thank you. The next question, first of all, for Thomas, and then Carlos, if you wouldn't mind, please. It's a question about the payload loss with battery electric compared with diesel vehicles. Are your electric vehicles carrying the same capacity, Thomas? And then Carlos, if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about the weight penalties of battery electrics, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so basically it's not a problem. It's a question of sizing. and so it's also in our case it was not an issue. So what I understand from e-trucks, the bigger the better for an e-truck.
Yes.
And
yes.
Payload was never an issue.
No, I mean, it must be a trade-off between range and payload. The more batteries you put on, the better the range, but you lose payload. What's your...
Well, but we had that, maybe that's a specialty in our case, we had a range of 120 kilometer maximum. So for us, in this case, for direct store distribution, it was not an issue.
Can I ask how many battery packs your Renaults have? Because I believe they can have between 2 and 6, depending on what you need. Which option have you gone for?
Me or Carlos?
Sorry, you Thomas.
As I know, 2.
You have 2. That's okay. So that's you get the maximum payload. So yeah, over to you, Carlos. As I say, one particular question was for the Masters, Eddie. Will you have a 4.25 gross vehicle weight version of this to take advantage of the UK exemption for low emissions vehicles? And as you move up the range, what are the payload versus range payoffs?
Yeah, I think we are looking on the with the authorities and the government bodies on dispensation schemes at the moment. We're working jointly with them, so that's what we are doing. Back to Thomas' point. Of course, if you take a 16-ton with 6 packs, you'll have, that's because you as a customer are looking for range rather than payload, and I think that's finding that good compromise. And I think it comes down to also having an understanding of the customer's operation and not thinking the same way as you would think as a conventional truck. You just have to reset yourself and say, all right, today I'm operating in that way. Maybe I can change the way I operate. And then I can move to an electric vehicle. But most of the time, as I said, in the graph I shared, for urban applications, we believe the standard will be a 466 pack, 366 pack, for instance, which will provide a range depending on the application of at end of life, circa 150, 200 kilometers, which is quite a statement. So I think the balance will be there, and one by one we will tailor to what is required to the customer.
Okay, another question for you, Carlos, has come in. I'm going to ask this as a question rather than a statement. It looks like the 26-ton electric vehicle does not have a direct vision rated cab. Is that the case? And obviously people are looking for vehicles to operate in London. DVS is an issue, as well as the zero emission zones. Does it have a star rating?
It does have a star rating. It can work with safety permits, and I think we are very focused on urban transportation. So I think give us some time, and we will come with solutions.
Yes, great. Rikesh, quite a few questions. Very interested in the Freight Lab studies. You put 6 particular case studies up there. People are quite interested to know. Can you give us any more detail on how those are going, when the results will be presented, and what the studies are actually looking at in practice, please?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So we've just commenced the first trial in the last couple of weeks. So we've started with the MSOL trial, and we're currently just shaping the other 5 innovative ideas, matching them up with the partners. As you can imagine, having 15, 20 different stakeholders all trying to shape the challenges together takes some time. But the idea is the first few trials could last up to, no, not first few trials, some trials could last up to 3 months, some could last up to 12 months. It's about creating that right level of evidence that tells us what's worked, what hasn't worked. But more than happy to come back at a future session and provide a review of what we've learned from this activity.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Another one for you, Rikesh, I'm afraid. Sorry, there's a lot of questions aimed at you. What's the role of road pricing in the future in terms of encouraging the take-up of cleaner vehicles? I mean, nationally, it's going to be an issue because as people switch from conventional fuels to battery electric, the tax take from fuel is going to go down. So I think that's going to be an issue nationally. But is road pricing part of TfL's future strategy at all?
I mean, what I can say, road pricing's been there since 2003. Since the congestion charge and then the other charges we've had. Yes. And so, what would happen in the long run? Well, you have to explore different ideas. I cannot commit one way or the other because I don't personally know. But we
Okay.
are keeping options under review.
Yes, great. I mean, we had the Olympics in London in 2012, and there seemed to be a lot of lessons learned there in terms of reducing congestion, out of hours deliveries. With these quieter electric vehicles coming along, is there an opportunity to revisit those ideas and see if there's an opportunity to encourage more out of hours, or is that very much down to the customers? If there's nobody at the end recipient place to take the goods, if you turn up at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's not much you can do. But is there anything you can do to encourage the customers of the freight industry to work with the industry? Because I'm sure most logistics operators would love to run at night when the roads are quiet, but it doesn't seem to be a very popular thing with their customers. Is there anything you can do to encourage retailers and officers to have nighttime receptions open?
Yeah, I think a major success of the Olympic Games was the collaboration and the convening power that TfL had. You know, we had a very clear focus and we wanted to make sure the games in London are successfully delivered. And I think as a result of the games, those conversations are still continuing, and our relationship with the freight industry, you know, has been really strong as a result of that engagement during that period. And I think going back to that first point I made, by trying innovative solutions like the MSOL one, where we're creating new evidence, if we can then do that with the carriers, which we are with Freight Lab, I think if the carriers agree it's working, if their customers agree it's working, the cities think it's working, and the evidence is there, I think we should take that conversation further.
Excellent, thank you. A question for two questions for Thomas, actually. One thing we're concerned about in this country is people talk about range anxiety of electric vehicles. You know, will it get to my destination? But that to a certain extent is being changed by recharging anxiety. Can I recharge? Do your electric vehicles only recharge back at base, or do you look for recharging opportunities en route?
We only recharge on the site and not on the roads. And until now, it's absolutely no problem when we charge overnight and drive through the day. Right.
Did you have to put in extra supply capacity at the base to recharge these vehicles, or were you lucky enough to have a very good electricity supply already?
Yeah, that's a very good question. At the moment, you know, in our distribution or logistics centers, we have forklift trucks. They electric forklift trucks, so we can use the infrastructure to charge the forklift trucks also for the trucks. And by having now 20 e-trucks, then per location we have around about, we have 14 locations, logistics locations in Switzerland. So then we have maximum 3 trucks at the location, and that's for our infrastructure at the moment no issue. We saw if we would have on some smaller locations 10 e-trucks, so the full range, and then we should have a discussion with the local electric company to adapt the situation. But it's feasible, and by making a long-term plan, it will work.
Okay. Have the adoption of the e-trucks had any noticeable effect on beer sales? Are people recognising Carlsberg for what they're doing for the environment and rewarding you with buying more beer, or has it had no impact as far as I know? The pandemic's obviously had a big impact on beer.
At the moment, we are also we have also a lockdown in Switzerland, so it's great. But we saw that we are recognized as sustainable, and when I compare the absolute figures, what we are doing in the brewery, and compare what we are doing on the road, also if you have the numbers, then the in the brewery it's or packaging has a much higher impact. Then we see that e-trucks, the effect of having e-trucks compared to the compensation, the efficiency of that is quite high. So meaning e-truck has a strong effect on the public view on the company.
Yes. Yes. Great.
So that's the effect is good. The important thing that the branding is really nice.
Yes.
That you really say, okay, this is an e-truck.
Yes. You say that. You say that on the side of the vehicles. Do you make a big deal of the fact it's an e-truck?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just going back to recharging, I'd like to ask Rikesh and then Carlos. Customers, when we talk about light vehicles in particular, quite often the vehicles are taken home rather than stay at the depot for recharging. Who should be responsible for making sure that as we make this transition to battery electric, that there's sufficient recharging infrastructure, both at people's homes, in depots, and maybe at the street? If you need to recharge en route, who should be responsible? Is that national government, local government, or the manufacturer working with the operator? Whose job is it to make sure these vehicles have enough power? Rikesh first, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a relatively new industry, and I think we need to assess what the roles of the different actors is, because city infrastructure, I feel, has a role to play, but so does charging at depot. And I think two points. One is how fast is the technology? Because if it takes you 3 hours, 4 hours to charge, well, that's a challenge, because it's using up a space in a city environment. If it's a rapid charger that does it quicker, and there is a market failure where none of the energy providers or the forecourts can't provide it, well, then we need to assess the role of the city there. So I think it depends, A, if there's a market failure, and B, or the other way around, what's the level of maturity of the technology?
Yeah, so if I may add, Steve, on that, then I think there is sometimes something to clarify here, which is back to the slides I shared today. In an urban environment, a full charge overnight is what is required for the trucks to operate in the vast majority of the cases. I mean, in London, how many miles a day would a truck do anyway? The radius from Westminster to M25 is probably 20 miles max in average. So within that environment, you're not going to do 400 kilometers a day, are you? So the requirement for charging in most cases will be a 22 kilowatt charger, and you might have a number of them at depot. So the challenge for us is really working with the operator at depot. How do we make that diagnosis? We have the partners to do that with us today, which can do that. And then the next thing is, how do we have, and today there is some funds available on that in the UK, but more would be welcome to support operators to equip their depots in terms of charging infrastructure. But I think we should not think that we will need in cities plenty of parking slots for trucks to charge for them to do their job. The technology today in many cases is a return to base, 22 kilowatt overnight charge will do the job with a good partner from an infrastructure perspective, which do smart charging, load leveling, controlling the entire operation. It works.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. For bigger vehicles, back to base is fine. But as I say, a lot of the parcels companies, a big proportion of their workforce are self-employed couriers. They probably take their vehicles home. Sure. I think a big barrier to decarbonising the 3.5 ton van fleet is going to be how these things are going to get recharged.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Yes. Okay. We haven't mentioned the H word so far. Sorry, Rikesh, go on.
Yes, and I was focusing on the larger vehicles, but in terms of the smaller vehicles, we do have 6,000 charge points across London already.
Yes.
We'll have another 300 more rapid chargers this year.
Yes.
That is something we are investing in. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. I thought you were talking about the bigger vehicles. But one other point I would add is we have a similar challenge with the bus network, where we're hoping with government support, by 2030 we can fully electrify our bus fleet, and with that support by 2026 we will bring 2,000 buses that are fully electric. So, but we do need to think about how do you charge that in the depot?
Yes.
How do you ensure that, particularly buses in London, if they're turning around?
Yes.
Quite difficult. So where do you put the right charge point on the network?
Yes.
So we're having similar challenges with our own fleet.
Yes. Rikesh, what's the role of hydrogen going to be in your 9,200 buses? Are they all going to be battery electric, or do you see a role for fuel cells?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but I think we've tried some hydrogen buses already in London. And I'm not, again, not my area of expertise, but sometimes someone said to me that to create the hydrogen in the first place also has a disbenefit to the economy. I mean, to the environment, sorry.
Yes.
So again,
it certainly does.
Yeah, sorry.
Carlos, what's Renault's view on fuel cells? When will we see fuel cell trucks coming along, do you think?
I think on the second part of that decade. Now with the Volvo Group, we have a joint venture with Daimler. So we know that on the second part of this decade, this 2025 onwards, we will have hydrogen trucks being starting to hit the road, which will then help the decarbonization of the long haul segments.
Yes. Thomas, is that something you looked at before you went battery electric? I mean, there are some other hydrogen fuel cell trucks on the road in Switzerland. Are you looking at hydrogen, or do you think battery will fit your needs?
Yes, of course. And so my conclusion was when you have a long distance, 400 or 500 kilometers, then fuel cell hydrogen is better than battery. Basically, a fuel cell truck is also a battery e-truck. The difference is just the battery is the hydrogen plus and the fuel cell, and the question is what is at the end more efficient when you take the electricity from somewhere until it's on the road.
Yes.
And there are a lot of expertise in this area, and as I know, you lose energy when you the hydrogen technology.
Yes.
But the range on the long range, I think, or big, very big machines, I think fuel cell is a good alternative.
Yes.
Okay. Thomas,
with your battery electric vehicles, do they just do one shift per day and then spend the rest of the day charging? We've had a question coming in for people saying, if I've got a 24/7 operation, I'm often double or triple shifting my diesel vehicles now, and if I've got to go to a battery electric, which has to spend half the day charging, I'm going to have to buy even more trucks. What's your view on that one, please, Thomas?
60% is one trip, and maybe 60-40% is one trip per day, and 30% are two trips per day. But still, if the guys start at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then they are back at lunchtime, and then the second shift goes for the second half of the day, the total number of kilometers is not more than 100. So first shift 150, second shift 50, and that's the batteries is no problem.
Okay. Rikesh, again, this might not be your particular area of expertise, but people that live in London, parking tickets is a big issue. Is there any opportunity to incentivise battery electrics by giving them dedicated parking spaces?
Well, on the Transport for London road network, it's about the smooth movement of traffic. So it's really hard to create spaces for parking, but we do have some loading bays. I think it's a conversation we should have with local boroughs and see what the benefits are, and also conversely what the cost would be.
Yes, that's fine. One for you, Carlos, slightly tangential to this urban focus, but a lot of people are asking, when will we see bigger trucks? I mean, construction, is a big issue in London. We talked about DVS very briefly, but when will be an electric 32-ton tipper, do you think?
Well, I think it's if you take an image, they are on the horizon. We can see them coming.
Yes.
But I think it's down to now we go up to 26 ton. We know in an urban environment we will need tractors, we will need construction 8-wheeler vehicles. These vehicles are quite demanding from I would say a battery perspective. So the technology of battering is evolving. So I think in the next couple of years, we will see this coming to the market as well.
Yes. Rikesh, another quick question for you, if you don't mind. You talk about the Mayor's vision for zero accidents and zero harm. One person once described to me as a battery electric vehicle as a silent killer. Are you concerned that these things, because as the noise levels on them go down, more pedestrians might be killed and injured? And what's the solution to that, do you think?
We had a similar discussion with electric buses, and in fact, this is where innovation needs to come in. We've been piloting a series of noises with the right level of speaker, so pedestrians can hear a vehicle coming. Because just from an environmental point of view, it's a big change. And if we don't have some sort of warning mechanism, which is what we currently have, which is the noise, the levels of risk increases. So absolutely, I think we should be working with Carlos and other manufacturers to make sure that if there is a silent truck coming across the road, how do we make sure that it's not silent from a road safety point of view?
Yes, yes. There's a lot of talk, Rikesh, about consolidation and reducing vehicle movements by encouraging people to consolidate perhaps on the edge of cities and then do the last mile on electric vehicles. It's a very difficult thing to legislate for, because it almost goes against competition. If you're going to tell people we're going to mandate an electric vehicle consolidation centre and you all have to use it, is there any levers you can pull within those boundaries to encourage consolidation so we don't get as many vehicles coming in, whatever type they are?
Yeah, so I think TfL and Freight Lab tried to design this is as part of our land offering. How can we create new consolidation zones or centres, which an innovator could pick up, whoever it is doing the last mile picks up from a consolidation centre, and it's off one of the A roads where you can come in, download, and others pick up. So I think TfL is trying to encourage that, but I'm also seeing in the industry, some of the larger players are also setting up consolidation centres around the M25 and also around other suburban areas. So I think let's watch this space. Let's see what the industry is doing, because there's a benefit for them in terms of cost savings.
Yes.
And
yes.
as I said, how we get involved through schemes like Freight Lab.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think I've been through most of the questions. I'm going to close, Rikesh, by asking you my last cheeky question. You very briefly mentioned e-scooters. I think a lot of people who have to walk around the streets regard the things as a bloody menace. But do they have a role? Can you regulate them? Do they have a role in e-deliveries? If you can, stop people charging around at night at 30 miles an hour and knocking people over. What's TfL's view on e-scooters, please?
Yeah, so it's a new form of mobility. In some cities, I've seen some of the challenges they faced. So what we're doing in London is the government has set out a roadmap of a 12-month trial across the UK, and it's not for personal usage, as in not personal owned scooters, it's for rental companies. So TfL is currently procuring in a procurement process to bring operators in. Our view on it is clear. Any trial needs to have safety at the core as a core principle, and the specification we've set out does that. I think, can it be used for freight? The answer is, during the trial, absolutely not. At the moment, it's for customers to move around the city in response to COVID. But we want to explore how customers use it, use that evidence, inform the DfT, and then hope, let's see what decision the DfT come back with at a national level.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone who submitted some excellent questions. Thank you for making my job a lot easier. I think as chair, it's always up to me to ask the first couple of questions, but after then it's over to you. So thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank Rikesh, Carlos and Thomas for taking part and giving up their time to make some very, very interesting presentations. I thought it was great. I'd like to thank Renault Trucks again for sponsoring this. It's without your help, we couldn't do it. And as I say, these slides will be available from tomorrow for about 30 days at freightinthecity.com. So that's the end of the formal proceedings. Thank you very much, Steve, for everyone for taking part, and I hope you found it all useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.